So, kind of shifting gears, you've mentioned Iran several times, and that's clearly been your experience in Iran has really impacted your worldview. And so, I wanted to ask a couple questions about that. Starting with nuclear energy, why does Iran want nuclear energy so badly, and why would the USA not want Iran to develop nuclear energy?
Well, the reason Iran wants nuclear energy so badly is because of the fact that they're an oil exporting country. The oil that they use is oil they do not export, right? They want to maximize the amount of oil they export. So by developing nuclear energy, that means they consume less oil domestically. That's what that's about, and that by developing nuclear energy, they can expand their power system, use less of their own oil, and sell more oil on the international markets. And that's really what it's about more than anything. Plus, nuclear energy is more efficient than coal. It doesn't deplete their natural resources as much. It pollutes less. I mean, I've been to Iran, and I'll tell you, Tehran is, it's a great country, great country, but whenever I was in that capital city of Tehran, I was taking so much allergy medicine and all that, the amount of pollution, there's a lot of pollution, they see nuclear energy as something that's better for Iran, right? And they have been in full compliance with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Every nuclear site in Iran is monitored 24 hours a day, surveillance video to make sure they're not doing anything that could weaponize it. And furthermore, they complied fully with the nuclear deal. They never broke it. And now the United States has pulled out of it. And the United States, they signed a deal with the United States, gave up most of their peaceful nuclear energy program, and the United States still pulled out of the deal. So yeah, that's the situation there. Israel doesn't want Iran to have nuclear power. I mean, first things first. Okay. Israel likes to play up the idea that Iran is trying to get a nuclear bomb so it can nuke the whole world because they're crazy, scary Ayatollahs and they're going to kill us all. So we should fight Iran, right? So there's a propaganda value to this, right? I mean, Israel has loads of nuclear weapons. It's, the USA, is actually in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty by giving aid to Israel the way it does, because Israel has violated they're acquiring nuclear weapons, and Israel's never signed the treaty, but the USA is not permitted to support a country that is engaging in nuclear proliferation outside of the treaty. So the United States should immediately cut off aid to Israel if the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty really applied. But of course, Israel is the exception. But the idea, it's a propaganda value, right? We've all seen Netanyahu's speeches, and Iran is trying to get a bomb so they can blow up the world. We should all be terrified. It has a propaganda value, number one. Number two, though, that oil is the reason Israel exists. Right? At the end of the day, the reason that the Middle East is such a valuable, important region is because of the oil resources, right? And that the reason that the British were so enthusiastic about Theodore Herzl and his project of creating a Jewish homeland was because it was in the strategic interest of Western capitalism to have a base of support in that region, to have a group of European settlers set up a country in the Middle East so they could, work in the interest of the West, in the Middle East. And actually, this was long before Israel was created. I mean, the Jewish settlers in Israel often worked for oil companies, and would fight against Palestinians and Arabs that were, trying to blow up oil pipelines and things like that. And the British military was sent to Palestine in 1936 to protect Jewish settlers from the Arabs, but this was also about pushing back Arab resistance to the British in the Middle East. And so that Israel functions as an outpost of Western capitalism and imperialism in that region, because that region is very valuable, because it has lots of oil. And Saudi Arabia is in a bit of a crisis right now, because with fracking, Saudi Arabia is no longer as important to Western capitalism as it once was. We have energy independence now. And Israel is facing a similar situation, I think. Israel is no longer as important to Western capitalism as it once was. And Israel knows that. So if nuclear power were to take off, if countries all over the world started having nuclear power, if China, continues to speed ahead with nuclear fusion, that's why they just went to the moon to get helium-3. If that were to happen, if oil were eliminated fossil fuels were no longer the basis of our economy, there would really be no reason for the Western countries to prop up Israel any longer. And Israel knows that. Now, this is a very long-term, existential thing. I think in the short term, it's about propaganda, right? It's about the fact that Iran is a backer of the Palestinians, right? That Iran is a backer of the people of Bahrain and their struggle for freedom and democracy. It's a backer of the people of Yemen. And because Iran is associated with so many people in the region that are fighting capitalism and imperialism, Israel wants Iran to be as weak as possible. And it wants to play up the idea that Iran is a barbaric country that's, that's going to kill us all or whatever. So I think it's got propaganda value. It's got short-term value, in terms of regional conflicts. But the bigger picture is about oil and the Middle East itself. The Soviet Union had a plan to irrigate the Middle East. They were going to build, huge irrigation pipelines to the Middle East. And they were going to irrigate the desert and make it so that Middle Eastern countries could have booming agriculture. Right? And the idea was to create peace between Israel and Palestine by industrializing the Middle East and greening the Middle East. And the Ba'ath countries were very excited about this. Saddam Hussein and Assad and others were very excited about this. There were even some forces in Israel that were sympathetic to doing that. But 78, when you had the government of Menachem Begin came into office, the Likud party, that was a turning point. And the conversation about that move to bring peace to the Middle East through economic development, which the Soviet Union was leading along with the Israeli Labor Party and with the Ba'ath countries, that project ended. It was terminated. And I think that was a really negative turning point. And from that point onward, the instability in that region really escalated because the hope for, the way in any part of the world, the road to peace is always economic development. When people have jobs, when people have, schools and education, they don't join terrorist groups. They don't sell drugs. They generally, things get a little bit better. But when people are poor and desperate, that's when you get terrorism and instability and chaos and violence. And, the Middle East functioning, you go to some of these countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, a lot of these countries had nothing but oil and sand. Okay, these are oil and sand countries. There's an autocratic regime backed by the United States with a big stockpile of US-made weapons and a bunch of American companies extracting their oil, and that's what they got. Well, if there's going to be peace in the Middle East, those countries need to have economic development. And that's what I saw in Iran. You wouldn't believe the level of industrialization that Iran has. The big highways that they have built, the big power plants, the beautiful cities and gardens. Iran is one of the most developed countries in that region. They've broken out of Western capitalism. They're still a major oil exporting country, but they have done a whole lot to build their own car manufacturing, to build their own steel manufacturing, to make their own cell phones. Iran has really, really worked hard to not just be the oil colony of the West like it once was under the Shah.
So leading into my next question here, why should socialists support Iran in general, but also Iran's nuclear goals? It should be pretty self-evident by all the things you said, but is there anything else you would add to that?
Well, first of all, let's be careful about the word support. What does support mean, right? There are certainly policies in Iran that I don't approve of, and the Iranians are the first to tell you that they have problems in terms of human rights. There are aspects, there some of the ways women are treated, some of the LGBT policies, there are things there that I don't agree with and many Iranians don't agree with and certainly need reform, right? Now, I don't think it's right for me as an American to go there and say, you need to change this, you need to change that, but at the same time, in terms of human rights, there are certainly areas they need to improve, okay? And so, and when you say support, it's not like I blindly support everything they do. I'm not a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I don't agree with their ideology. They have a Shia Muslim revolutionary perspective. But at the same time, I would say Iran is not a capitalist country. They insist they are not socialist. If you go there, I have had this conversation with them many times. They are adamant. They say we are neither socialist or capitalist. We are an Islamic system. One of the slogans that Khomeini used during the revolution is he said, not capitalism, but Islam. And neither East nor West, meaning they weren't for the Cold War and the communist on the communist side of the Cold War or for the West. So, but if you look at the way Iran's economy is set up, the biggest economic entity in the country is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is a military organization. On top of that, all the oil is so major in their economy and it's all state run. Car manufacturing is state-run. Steel manufacturing is state-run. Healthcare is state-run. The economy is very much centralized in the hands of the state. They have 5-year economic plans. They have these things called Basij councils in every neighborhood that are like community assemblies where they get together and talk about what the supreme leader wants, and they enforce the goals of the revolution on a community level. They have pictures of Palestinian freedom fighters everywhere. They have pictures of Malcolm X everywhere. I would say Iran is a country that has broken out of Western capitalism, and I guess they want to call their system not capitalism. I would say it's definitely not capitalism. It's a revolutionary country. Now, the revolution is not a Marxist revolution. It's an Islamic revolution. But I think it's a progressive revolution in a progressive country. And on that basis, I think that socialists and leftists, while we might disagree with this or that aspect of it, I think that we can point to it as an example of a country that has broken free and achieved great things for its population, and points toward the hope for a new world. And if one country can break free, other countries can break free as well. And Iran can do it in a Muslim way, and the Bolivarians can do it in a Roman Catholic and indigenous way, and we'll eventually have to figure out our American way to do it over here. That's kind of how I view Iran.
Beautifully said.